Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're delighted that you've joined us today. This is your host, Dr. FM, Dr. Francis Munangi Mpindu, live on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Our studios are located in Toronto, in Canada, and our guest is all the way from across the Atlantic in Zimbabwe. We are privileged that we have a special guest with us today. As usual, we go live every Saturday at 11 Eastern Standard Time. We are live on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course, live stream, which is one of the most reliable platform to use for the kinds of things that we do. And we are broadcasting in over 100 different countries across the world. And so that's why we say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because it's so diverse. And every Saturday, we are delighted to have special guests. And today we are delighted that we have Miss Tinashe Madamombe all the way from Zimbabwe. And we're just so delighted. She's the founder of the Docus Project, and in a moment we're going to find out what that is and how it came about and the journey that led to that. And she is their communications and gender specialist. She's a blogger, she's a speaker, she is loaded. And I will also allow her to introduce herself and let us know some of the places she has been. I know she has been to Europe, and she'll tell us about that. She did some studies over there, and she also did some studies in the US. And so this is going to be a special project. Our topic for the day is Safe Spaces for Our Children. Now, we know that in Africa, over 70% of the population is below 30. And so we're talking about a very, very strong young continent. And so children are part of that. And so to have this topic, when we also think about some of the things that have happened before, and I can imagine with someone like Tinashe, who is a gender specialist, will be able to help us to understand some of the challenges girls have faced, women have faced. And I don't see, well, I had an opportunity to talk to her prior to all this. It's not a reaction to masculinity. This is a response to, hey, let's work together. Let's make sure that we are in healthier relationships so that we can work together as part of this global village. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Miss Tinashe Madamombe. And thank you so much. I know it's getting late already over there, but thank you for joining us this morning. So would you kindly take a moment to introduce yourself? I know I said some things about you, but what would you like us to know when we think about Tinashe Madamombe?
So thank you. And thank you for having me. It's such a great pleasure to be on this platform. And as you said, being broadcast across a number of different countries. I'm one person that's very passionate about raising the voices of women and women being given a space to speak and to share just their knowledge and also their experience. So for me, this is both a passion of mine and a great interest to get a space like this. So just a brief background, bouncing off what you've already said about me. I am based in Zimbabwe. I have a background in women and gender studies. I studied from the Women's University in Africa. Whilst doing my undergrad, I also then got a funded scholarship, an exchange program. I was studying at the University of Maine in women, gender, and sexuality studies. I'm also an Irish Aid alumni. I got an Irish Aid scholarship to study at the University College Cork. I have a master's in international public policy and diplomacy. I also have an executive diploma in project management, monitoring, and evaluation. Professionally, I am a communications specialist. I've worked in communications and advocacy, but mainly in NGO work supporting women's rights. I was working in one of the biggest women's rights movement organization here in Zimbabwe, and now I am focusing more on HIV and AIDS and sexual health rights for young people. But I do have a bias to young women, but just based on my passion. And I'm also a blogger. I've got a blog called Munukadzi, which translates to woman. That's Shona for woman. I blog mostly about gender-based violence and women's experiences. I'm a writer. I freelance writing on women's social issues and publish in local newspapers, which is articles that are published in local newspapers. Recently, this year, I also authored part of a chapter of a book, which is Women's Anthropology, which shares women's stories, so just women's voices, but mostly aligned to using writing as a method of explaining your story. We call it bleeding on paper. So that particular one was the main focus was on grief and struggles that women have actually gone through. On the other side, besides professionally, I run a nonprofit, a small community-based nonprofit called the Dockers Project. So the Docs Project works with orphaned children and vulnerable young women in communities in Zimbabwe. So mainly with the Dorcas Project, the background, where it came from. So just growing up, where the passion came from. Growing up, my mom was very much involved in Christian and social responsibility, mainly through the church. So I did get a lot of time where I had sisters that would visit for weekends or holidays that were being taken care of in places of safety, such as orphanages. And through that, I got to learn firsthand just how they struggles within orphanages, but not mainly because of the spaces they're growing up in, but just their own struggles growing up in a space where they didn't have to be with their parents. So that passion also just taught me the gaps that were there, and I always had this drive to find out how best can I then also penetrate into that and help young people and children to live their best life, even if they're in homes of safety. So the Dockers project has been functioning since 2016, mainly, like I said, in communities. We run different initiatives, which include what we call the Christmas in July. This is, we bring in a time of festivities, but we use it to really gather up support, both financially and physical support for children in different orphanages. But we also take it as a space where we go into these orphanages and spend time with the children. And this year we've actually introduced an aspect of mental health support for them. So having a mental health professional coming in that will study the children and then also then have a referral if there's much that we can do to support them. So not just being there to spend the day with them, but also finding out if there's any other support that they need. We also have what we call the Chikoro Fund. We fundraise money to pay for both education, school fees, but also the examination fees for underprivileged and orphaned children. We also do then host Christmas parties. So with these parties, what the background of that is, I've always thought of what I enjoyed most about if it's my birthday or if it was Christmas, and this was being around family, just the festivity that came with it, the gifts that we got. But these children that are in places of safety never get this chance. We've been to places where children don't even know how to blow a balloon because they've never held it in their hands. So simple things like that is what we're trying to bring, just that joy that I used to feel when I was younger. And this goes out even to some of my friends that also grew up with the privilege of having your parents around, or privilege of having just that space to celebrate and have festivities. So we love it because the children also look forward to it because they find it as support from the community. So we underestimate just having that family support or friends or people that come to visit you and not wanting to gain anything from you, but just to have the support. So in a nutshell, that's what the Dorcas Project is, and also what I am about as well. Thank you.
Wow, this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to get to know you a lot more, and also to understand some of the things that you're doing. We can tell that you are not just one of those people who would sit in an office and just do things from a beautiful office, but you are a practitioner. I mean, from the little you have shared so far, you are actively involved in so many things, and that is really encouraging. I was intrigued by your reference to your mom's influence in terms of connecting with others and helping others. And, we have always, and rightly so, acknowledged the fact that in Africa, women are really the backbones of our homes, our families, our communities, and even the nation. And people like yourself who are now, recognized as gender specialists and people who are making sure that there's equity and there's healthier relationships between male and female and children and youth and all that. This just goes to say that we are delighted. We are delighted that you've joined us today. And of course, those of you who just joined us, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And this is your host, Dr. FM, from our studios in Toronto, in Canada. And we're just so delighted that we have a special guest with us today. So when we think about homes, and I want to pick your brains a little bit here, Miss Tinashe, what would be what would be the advantage of keeping children in an orphanage, which is really an institution, and having children spread in different homes? Is it even practical to have these children in different homes, or are there so many of them that it's impossible to place them in homes? So what is happening when you think about the kind of work that you're doing with the children?
Yes, I think, well, an ideal world would be where everyone can take at least one child and either foster them or actually adopt them. But it's unfortunate that not everyone there's a lot going on. So even if it's with economic struggles, not everyone can take on a child. There are a lot of children that need to be taken care of, but I do believe the orphanages and places of safety are also very good places for them to be in. What I've also seen over the years that I've seen that's become different, and this is something that the Department of Social Welfare, when I look at a Zimbabwean context, has been trying to do and to improve. Where before, when I was younger, what we knew visiting some orphanages was that the children lived as if in a dormitory kind of setup, so as if it's a school. So even if it's where they slept was a big room with, if it's beds or mattresses across the room where they're all sleeping in there. But we've been seeing a shift in the change in the past couple of years, where they now have smaller homes within the orphanages, especially if it's a bigger orphanage. So they actually do have a home that has bedrooms and care mother within that place, and they're living as if it's actually a home. So if it's 10 children in that place, and that they have a mom that takes care of them, and they're actually cooking their own meals in there, as opposed to before where it was a community meal. So this is something that I've seen that is evolving, and this comes like from maybe the question where if a child is growing up in a family kind of setup is different if they're growing up in a school kind of setup. So some orphanages are moving to that in that direction. And also when it comes to the smaller ones, which are the smaller orphanages and place of safety, which we usually work with, it's a foster mother or a couple of foster aunties that are living together, and then they're taking care of various children, but in a home kind of setup. So they still have those social and cultural kind of setups that we already have in our own homes, and trying to maintain those. So the children are being taught to cook. There's then the older children that are also helping to take care of the younger children, just how we've always grown up in an African kind of setup as a home.
That is
So
very
ideally, I would
encouraging.
say yes, it would be good if everyone could take one child. I know if you compare the population, it's possible that everyone could take one child and take care of, but that's in an ideal world. Realistically, you won't have people that are taking up children, and also you'd we also can't move away from the policy that comes in when it comes to what it takes for you to be able to adopt a child or even to foster. So the process is also quite long, or even the background checks are longer. Not everyone, you really need to want to be taking in this child for you to go through the process. So a lot of barriers besides just families, some families failing to cater for themselves and then being able to take on another child.
This is very, very encouraging, Miss Tinashe, because I guess one of the things in communications, and you would understand this, oftentimes we speak from our conclusions, but we're not necessarily letting each other know the process that led me to why I'm asking this question.
Mhm.
So the thing I was wrestling with within my heart and in my mind when I asked the question was, I wonder what kind of a home environment is created for these children if they are in an orphanage. And you rightly answered the question, and you said, well, what there's a shift. What's happening now in some of these homes, some of these orphanages, is they're creating opportunities for a home-like environment where you have smaller segments within that environment where they can have their own meals, so they are like a little family, which is really wonderful. And that's what I was hoping that we would wrestle with that. But now you're saying it's already happening, and that is really, really um, um, I'm very, very pleased to hear that. We have Icon. Is that Blickman or Lightman? Streaming live from Lagos State in Nigeria. I'm enjoying the program. So thank you so much, Icon. We're glad that you are joining us. And to those who just joined us, this is Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And we are delighted to have Miss Tinashe Madamombe with us. Miss Tinashe Madamombe is a founder of the Dorcas Project, and she is the communications and gender specialist. She's a blogger, she's a speaker. She is someone who is not afraid to get her hands dirty. Like, she is doing the work in the front lines. So we're just delighted that you are here with us. So you also deal with gender violence. Now, I know that someone like yourself, you would have seen a lot and you would have heard a lot. Now, without really going into the gruesome details, and by the way, I am opposed 550, 1,000% to gender violence. This whole thing of just whether it's male or female, in most cases, it is really the women who get, the short end of the stick, and which is very, very unfortunate. I mean, I am aware of that because my own mom, when she was younger, she actually moved away from a very, very violent relationship, and I'm so glad she did. So, do you see an increase? Do you see a change? What would you be doing? What would your organization be doing to make sure that there's that shift in terms of how guys relate to young girls, how little boys should relate to little girls, and how men should relate to women? What is happening? And by the way, we try not to to get into politics, so we don't want to jeopardize your position and your work. We just want to have a conversation. So feel free to let us know what is happening in the kinds of circles that you are working with. Is there a change? What could be done to make things better?
So from my point of view and what I've seen in the past couple of years is that there's been an increase in reporting of gender-based violence. So I think something that has also been going on is actually defining what gender-based violence is and also being able to categorize it. Because when we talk about gender-based violence, we're not only speaking about physical violence where someone has been brutally assaulted physically, but it can also go into different sections of sexual abuse is also a form of gender-based violence. When you look at there's what we term economic abuse, which is mostly if in a marital kind of setup, and someone is withholding, if it's funds from their partner, for the development or the children's development, that also constitutes as abuse. But we've seen an increase in, one, people reporting, and secondly, people then also speaking up and speaking out against gender-based violence. We've also then seen men coming out to speak to gender-based violence, because in the past we gender-based violence was seen as a women's issue. But I think the realization that this affects both men and women, and men slowly also coming up to speak out because they're also getting abused. But there's a cultural and a social stigma that comes with a man coming and speaking up and saying, I'm being abused in this way. But slowly, I think men are also coming out and facing that stigma head on. But in a local context, there's also been a lot of support in terms of legal policies that actually support um, uh, not just women, but even men that are being abused. So in Zimbabwe, we have what is called the Gender-Based Violence Act, which speaks to issues of gender-based violence. So you can go in and report, and your issue is dealt with because there's a policy. So just the increase for me in the speaking out, but we're also seeing an increase in the number of GBV cases as well. But at least people have safe spaces and safe places to go to report it, and that actually helps. But we've also seen there's a lot of the root of gender-based violence maybe is, for me on a personal level, what needs to be dealt with to identify what it is. So for example, there was an increase of cases of GBV during the COVID period. So during lockdown, we saw an increase in the number of GBV cases. So how do you deal with the root? If GBV was increasing during COVID, is it the economic stress that was along the lines? Was it people staying within confined areas that was causing this gender-based violence? So looking at how do you solve the root problem that's causing the increase, and actually being able to identify it. So yeah, from my experiences, it's really just been seeing that a lot of people are speaking out, and it's been nice and refreshing to hear men's voices and speaking up against men as perpetrators as well, rather than just having women speaking out against men as perpetrators.
You are touching on some things that are really, really special and very encouraging to hear, because oftentimes, we have our own biases and we look at things from where we are and from our own experiences. But I am pleased, number one, to hear that there's an increase in reporting. People are realizing I cannot be silent about this. I need to let other people know, and I need to let the authorities know so that something can be done about it. And that is very, very encouraging. And obviously, I mean, with pain, sometimes we say, the pain has to be so deep that you're like, I can't take this anymore. There has to be an outlet. So it's encouraging to hear that, people are opening up to talk about what is happening. And then you talked about people are speaking out, which is very, very important as well. So it's not just reporting, but people are speaking out. And then you talked about men coming out. I mean, you're absolutely right. The cultural stigma of men, because we're told you're supposed to be in charge. And so when someone else is abusing you, you find it hard to report, but you're saying there's a shift there. I really liked the legal support that you mentioned, that there's a gender-based act in Zimbabwe, and that people are realizing that when you do certain things, you're actually tampering with the law. And of course, when you break the law, you get into serious trouble. One of the things I find, I guess, coming from my own areas of expertise, which is the emotional, mental, behavioral therapy and aspects. Oftentimes, when a crime or something is reported, we look at the one who did it, and we also look at the one who has been violated against. But oftentimes, we forget to look at the family that has been affected by this whole thing. You talk about children, you talk about, the whole extended family. What do you see as some of the things that could be put in place? I know I'm picking your brains here without having given you a whole lot of time to think about it, but I'm just wondering what could be put in place to make sure that the healing is not just contained in these two individuals. Let me tell you why I'm asking that. The colonial approach is they individualize. So you look at one person who has a problem and you work with that person with a specialist. Now, in Africa, we belong to villages. When we talk about family, we don't have aunts and uncles because we don't even use those terms. They are family members, but they also get affected. So what would you see as solution in terms of making sure that when there's these kinds of issues, maybe someone has been abused, someone has been raped, someone has been attacked, what help would be there to make sure that the children, the extended family, and the village would get some kind of support? I know I'm just throwing things at you right now, but what are some of the things that come to your mind in terms of possible solutions to this? Because I'm really thinking, Africa, we say, it takes a village to raise a child. So when someone is hurt, what is the village doing to make sure that we walk together in this journey?
So I'm going to start answering that because I was going to say I had a however side to when you asked me about GBV, the last question that I just answered. And the however part for me was that there's still the stigma that comes along with reporting. So not only for men, but even for women as well. They are still gatekeepers of the culture that we always knew. In Shona, we would call it kufukura hapa. This is like opening up your armpit for everyone to see what is going on. So you find out that if in the culturally, there were structures that were there for reporting that were not legal structures. So, for example, if there was a certain kind of abuse that was going on within a marriage, you'd report to your side of or his side of the relative, and then they would come and try to solve it. So when you now jump that cultural aspect and go to a legal route, those same gatekeepers of the culture are now coming to you to say, why are you reporting your husband? So the cultural and that cultural background is still there, even though people report. So you find out people that don't report are either afraid that what's the family going to say? You are reporting the breadwinner. If he gets arrested, who's going to take care of those children that you have with him? There's also, we can even touch on religion as well, where there's structures that if you're having marital issues, if it's related to gender-based violence, you go and report to your reverend, for example, and then they will counsel you through that. So they also, those voices from the family and the religion and society are still at the back of a lot of people's heads before they even go and report. And they sometimes are louder than your own voice to actually go and report or to leave a situation where you're being abused. So that's already one part that comes into when we're speaking about, is there a solution to coming to the same families that we're saying are keeping you from reporting? They also need that support, because for some of them, the culture is all that they've known. So they don't know anything else besides this should be dealt with within a family, a family kind of setup. When we look at things like I was saying, there's different levels when it comes to gender-based violence, even things like marital rape, which are now also recognized. But if a wife is to report marital rape, when you look at it from a cultural aspect, they're saying, but this is your husband. How can you say your own husband would rape you? But it's actually something that is real and something that is there and something that someone can actually be arrested for. And you still carry that shame if you are to report it, because the question always comes to the victim, that what have you done that is causing your partner to then want to actually hold you down for a sexual relationship. But when I look at the support that would be needed, or that's needed, for me, I would think more of the for the children, because I think just as we never think that children actually know what's going on. We try either to hide it from them, and we're just hoping they don't see that there's issues, or they don't hear the loud voices or the noise when parents are fighting. And we underestimate that effect that comes even when the children are grown and into even their own relationships, and even in schools, because you find other kids are bullies because what they've known how to resolve conflict in relationships is from what they see with their parents. So if their parents shout at each other for leaving the car unlocked, for example, if someone else was to do something at school to them, the reaction that they know is actually just to speak in the same way in a loud voice as the parent would have. So for me, there's not enough support. I think we ignore the children because we think they do not know. Even when it comes to cases of divorce and the children are younger, they just know that I moved out with mom, but there's no one that's explaining to them what that means. Or does it mean dad's coming back? Does it mean he's not coming back? There's no explanation towards that. But it's because I believe it's coming from our past and also culturally, where children were never allowed to speak unless spoken to. But the generation that we're bringing up now is totally different. They're a different breed altogether. They want to know why. They want to know what's happening, and for them that helps in their development and even just in their life. And they understand things like mental health issues, which we didn't know existed before. So I think there's a need for more support for that. But what
Yeah.
that looks like for me would actually come from an initiative from the parents themselves. They're the ones that need to speak to their children or get help for their children if they can't play that part. If we look at, there's also good parts, I guess, when we look at Africa, and from a Zimbabwean context, where there were, like I said before, there were structures that were there. So, for example, anatete, what we call our anatete, who could be your dad's sisters, or your mother's brothers, who are nasekuru, would then have a part to play when it came to those kind of counseling services, where you take your, or either tete comes in, auntie comes in to speak to the children, to explain to them what's going on, and or they have a chance to ask the questions that they can't ask the parents. But now also we've seen a lot of especially in the Zimbabwean context, where people are migrating. The that layer, cultural layer that we had of the Tetes and the Sekrus is no longer there, because all we can do is talk to them on the phone. They're never really there to come in to speak to the children, to tell them, to give them that support that they might need. So it's now left again to the parents, the actual parents, who are finding the conversation difficult to have with their children when it comes to cases. So it's like we're going around in circles, where there
Yeah.
was a structure that
It
was
becomes
supposed
very
to solve.
cyclical.
Yes, and that structure is no longer there. So we need to engage new, well, we're evolving and things are changing. So there needs to be accepting that things have changed, and then how
Mhm.
best can we then navigate that kind of system. But I haven't seen, especially when the kids are younger and they're unable to really ask the questions, there hasn't been any support that has been from parents that uh, well, to explain and to support the children through the difficulties when it comes to gender-based violence or anything else, rather.
Ms. Tinashe, I really appreciate your openness in just saying, I think our nations are struggling in terms of um, continuing to create safe spaces for our children. Now, it may not be as uh, it may not be as serious, but it is real. And what I'm hearing from you is parents have a very, very important role to play in terms of creating safe spaces for children, be it emotional space, be it mental space, for them to be able to express themselves, what is happening at school, what did somebody do. I was very encouraged the other day when I saw this video where a mother takes her little girl and she says, let me show you, if someone touches you here, it is inappropriate. If someone touches you here, it is appropriate. If somebody touches, and she was just walking with her and showing her these different parts of the body and just saying, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate. And then she said, okay, now I want you to show me which parts are appropriate for someone, for an adult or for another person to touch you. And she just went one after the other. And mom said, is there another part that is a good part for anybody to touch you? And that's okay. And she looks at the mother and actually like saying, I think what you've told me, I've just told you back. And the mom said, I'm very happy to hear that. And then she said, okay, now show me the parts that people should not touch you. And she just went on and on and on. And I was just so pleased. Now, I know that in some of our cultures, especially in Africa, we might have difficulty to actually have these kinds of conversations. But you're saying it's important for parents to have these kinds of conversations, especially, I mean, you have lived in the diaspora, so you know what happens out there as well, that, you know, the nucleus of the family unit is no longer what it is or what it was. And so we have to find new ways. And so this is really, really wonderful. Now, again, to our viewers and our listeners, you're on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. FM, on Today's Africa. We are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and of course, StreamYard. And so we are delighted that you are joining us in this very, very important dialogue on creating safe spaces for our children. Now, when you look at some of the things that would then happen in the homes and in the orphanages, do you see an increase? I know we talked about increase and encouraging to hear that there are increases in reporting. Now, do you see the numbers? Is there more and more need to have orphanages or homes where these children could come in? Or do you see that it's being contained and in your neck of the woods, people are doing a good job responding to the needs of children?
I was also just going to add, when you said you loved the video, I've also seen a video locally. I know now schools also have a song that they brought up with parts, they call it the don't touch. So kids are now being taught the parts that this is my don't touch. So if you ask them what's your don't touch, they actually know where to point and they don't allow anyone to touch that part. But schools are now also stepping in terms of education.
I'm
and
delighted
like you said, because
to hear that.
institutions that we used to have are no longer there. When we look at, especially from a Zimbabwean context, and you see there's still children that are living on the street, I would say then there's a need for more places of safety, because how do we bring those children that are begging on the street into homes that they can actually live in? So there's still a need for more. And I think for me, it's about not waiting for a government as an institution to build these services for people, but also how then can the private sector come in? How can individuals come in? And even religious institutions. I've seen a couple of orphanages are supported by different religious organizations. So different churches will have their own orphanage, which they bring in and they're supporting it. So I feel it's the role of, like you said, in an African context, that it takes a village to raise a child. So we can't just look up to one institution and say, expecting them to set up certain safe spaces for children, but it's also on the onus for even everyone as an individual has a part to play. So it might not be that you are able to build a whole institution, a whole orphanage, but you're also able to take just, you have your own supply, whether it's clothes, it's food supplies that you can bring in to support that. So there's still a need for more. Mainly for me, it's because I've seen children that are begging and living on the street, and also seen a couple of people that are homeless. So it's then also difficult to separate when you look at the terms, when you think of someone that's homeless, and how do you separate that from a child that's living on the street. But when you really look at it from my perspective, this is one and the same thing, because they both need a place of safety, regardless of the circumstances. So some are on the street not because they are orphaned, but because they live in situation at home is not conducive enough. They would rather be out on the street. But both an orphan child and one that has a difficult living condition at home both need a place of safety. So finding spaces, and I think something that I've also found difficult for vulnerable children and also even orphan children is that legally or institutionally they only allowed to be catered for until they're 18, and then after they're 18 they need to find somewhere else to go. But where do you find somewhere else to go unless you've been in a space where that's allowed you to finish your schooling and but at 18 you're only going to tertiary education, so most likely maybe we haven't actually found a job that you can take care of yourself. So how do we make it how do we improve to say what happens to the children after they turn 18? Are we advocating more for people to adopt these children, but how feasible is it as well? So just thinking around that what happens to these children after they reach an age where the place of safety that they're living in, they can no longer continue living in that space.
Again, you touched on something very, very important there in terms of transitions. You know, you have been in this home and now you're 18. You have to move out of the system. But then the question is, were you being prepared to get ready to move on or to move out? And I think that's where different organizations in the community really need to collaborate and create these opportunities to be able to work together. I was very happy to hear you mention churches coming together to create either homes or orphanages that are run by the church. That is very, very encouraging to hear, because for the most part, we have been relying on the Western nations to come and establish this. But now I'm hearing you say our own people in our own neighborhoods are saying, let's respond to what is happening. Now, I'm sure our viewers and listeners would be interested to hear this as well. When you look at some of the challenges that you face, and with regards to meeting the needs, when you look at the girl child, how much of this is being shared with the little boys and the men, to make sure that the gender violence isn't continuing or isn't being maintained as the norm? Because I know that my generation, which is a little older than yours, we are from the old school where certain things were almost acceptable. That if I'm unhappy with my wife, you can ruffle her, you can do all kinds of things to her. And I can even tell you that there were times when the police would actually say, well, that is a domestic issue. And now you're telling me that things have changed, which is really encouraging. I'm very, very pleased to hear that. By the way, my mom taught me that you never raise your hand to a little girl and you never raise your hand to a woman. and you never raise your hand to a girl. So even in those days, she was very, very clear, making sure that, we understand that. Now, are there some programs that are happening to making sure that our young men, the little boys, are growing up with this understanding that when the little girl you're touching and poking says, no, don't do that, you need to stop and take that seriously? What is happening to making sure that these little boys and young men are understanding that a no is a no and you don't play around with that?
I wouldn't know if there's actual service that are going. I know there's a lot of men support groups. I'll just come back maybe before answering that question, also to throw in a couple of questions in terms of who, because I've heard the conversation going on about we're raising a lot of strong women, but now the men cannot keep up because there's been over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of talk when it comes to girls and women's empowerment. There's girls and women's support groups. There's a lot of programs that are teaching women to be more empowered, not only economically, but with education and culturally, and also, like I was saying, even to speak out. And there's a group of thought that men and boys are being left behind, and now they are failing to handle empowered women. But for me, on a personal, from a personal point of view, is who was teaching these girls to be more empowered? Whose responsibility was it to teach these girls? And when I look back at a cultural setup, like I was saying, girls would always be brought to the side by the aunties who were within the family structure, and you're taught how to treat your husband well. You're taught how to take care of the home. You're waking up very early in the morning. You do the dishes before going to school. Who was responsible for teaching the boys, and where were they not in and not empowering the boys to be as empowered as women are?
That's a
So
very powerful
yeah,
concept. I
so
like that thought-provoking question.
yeah, so for me, it comes back to whose responsibility, because when you then look at it then comes back again to people throw it back again to women, and women are being made to be responsible for bad behaving men. So it comes back to the mother that raised this child is the one that didn't raise them well. But where was the father in all
Mm,
this? Why wasn't the father not teaching this child how to treat a woman well? Was he not leading by example, where
yeah.
the son could see that he was treating the mother very well, for him to also grow up to want to treat his wife very well? So I take back the responsibility to men and to boys themselves, because the reason why me as a woman, if I find out that my husband's not pleased with me, I will go and seek help to make my relationship better. The same way, if men are finding it difficult to keep up with empowered women, they should be finding the help. It's not the responsibility of women or mothers to raise men that are not stepping up to their responsibility. So I'll throw it back to men and say, what are men doing to raise boys that will actually step up to the podium and be who they're supposed to be? It's not the responsibility of women to do that. The honors lays on men themselves.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with you. And thank you for that. Uh, just that poignant point, and just say, listen, um, the men have the responsibility, and I think a lot has to do with the breaking down of our family structures. Now, in the past, of which it's well, it is what it is. That in the past, I think the men would get together and help the other younger men to do things. But for me, when I look at what is happening now, I see that there's a paradigm shift. There were times when men were being told what to do. We can't continue to use that approach. It's not, well, you do this or else. You better do this. But from a value perspective, are our men understanding the value of equity and equality. Now, we're not saying that life is all about unisex. No, we have female responsibilities and we have male responsibilities. And I think the more we understand these and come together in terms of, working together. For example, my significant other, when we have issues and things that we need to talk about, it's not about who has the last word. Yes, I am the husband and she is my wife, but we are there to say, what do we do? What is good for us? So taking responsibility is very, very important. And of course, somebody has to be put in the hot seat. So you can't say, well, both of you have to put in the hot. No, there has to be one person who has to be held responsible. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Who has been teaching the men to make sure that our boys behave well and relate to the girls better without using punishment, of course, if somebody violates punishment, there is room for punishment, but we're also saying we need to teach, we need to educate and help one another to function more from a value perspective. And so, very good point. I'm so glad did you have anything else to add to that point?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think
it is so powerful.
Yes, just to add on that, like you rightfully say, it's not a competition of who's right or who's wrong, but we are, especially when I look at it from a feminist point of view, where what we're fighting against is the structure. So we're both men and women are fighting against the same structure, not against each other. So we're not saying women are better than men or women can live alone without men, but how can we work together and live together in unity? Like you said, the concept of equality and equity. When we speak about equality, I know a lot of men would then think women want to be the same as men, but that is not it. When we're looking at that, is the equal opportunity for both the boy and the girl. And when I'm looking at the past, even in a Zimbabwean context, where, like I was saying, culturally, that there was that expectation that before a girl goes to school, they would need to clean up the house, they would need to do the dishes. But by the time that they walk to school, they're already too tired to even concentrate in school. But the boy is thriving because he's done his chores, but maybe his chores is to let out if it's in a rural setup, you've let out the cattle or the goats, and then you've gone to school. But the one that's done the cooking for you and even put the water for you is the girl. So you're already on a different playing field. So you find out that measures that were being put in place were to cover up. It's bringing the equity, like we say. How do we make life for the girl child better so that they can be at the same standpoint? And I know we speak a lot about, even when it comes to things like menstrual hygiene products, that you find that girls that do not have access to menstrual hygiene, good menstrual hygiene products, will miss some days in school. But a boy will not be affected by such things. So when empowerment programs come in and we're collecting sanitary wear for girls, this is to avoid them missing school, for them to then become equal to the boys, they're getting the same equal opportunity. So these programs are coming to support what needed to then be the equity and the equality when it came. But we're not trying to put girls further ahead than the boys, but just creating a level where they both striving at life at the same level, without the other issues that are unique to girls that they face that men also then don't.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And we are live on Today's Africa with Ms. Tinashe Madamombe, who is the founder of the Docus Project, working with women and children and making sure that safe spaces are created for women and for children, because it is important for us to be aware of what is happening in society. The world continues to change, and in Africa, right across the continent, there's so many changes, and we are also seeing that there is this intentionality when it comes to creating opportunities for the girl child. And when you mentioned the responsibilities of men, of little boys and little girls, the girl doing a lot more chores than the boy. And I was also pleased to discover that in some of our schools now, you're talking about the menstrual cycles and all that, and making sure that our boys understand that. When I was younger, that was a taboo. We never talked about it. You would never hear, and if you saw anything that sort of implied something was happening, you weren't supposed to be hush, hush, and not say anything. But you're saying it's important for uh, for the boys to understand this, so that not only are they sympathetic, but they are also respectful, and they know what is happening. Now, you are a gender specialist. There are some people, Ms. Tinashe, who look at gender specialists as people who are reacting to the fact that women want to be men. And you mentioned earlier, said, no, it's not about women wanting to be men. We're simply saying we need to understand what's going on. Would you, in your profession and your specialty, I know this is your specialty, enlighten us on the importance of these gender issues, and what are the issues? What is the focus? How best can we capitalize on this so that we don't see you as an activist against men, but you are saying, hey, let's work together. Like, I mean, I didn't pick that up from you. You mentioned so many things that are very, very positive, and I can tell that you have a good head on your shoulders. So enlighten us in terms of gender issues, gender equality, and these things.
Yeah, for me, women can never be men, and men can never be women, both from a biological standpoint, and even going into the emotional, or the way that we just are as beings. So when we speak about gender, we're speaking about both male and female. It's not specifically towards women, but I know a lot of people, when you speak about gender rights, you're thinking, or gender activism rather, you think, oh, they've come, those people have come, but we're speaking to both. And when you look at things from with a what we call a gender lens, you are looking at it from a perspective of how does it affect one gender in comparison to the other, and how can you then make it like I was saying before, an equal playing field. So for me, when I look at, I've written most of my writing when it comes to articles is looking at different social issues, but how do they affect women differently from men? And when you take a look at that, then you are able to see from that lens, then you're able to see how there's actually a difference. I'll give an example. Say we talk about climate change, for example. Uh, Climate change in an African context, or even worldwide rather, we've seen temperatures increasing. We've seen an increase in national disasters when it comes to floods. There's droughts every other year in Africa. And how does that then affect women uh, when in comparison to men? So when it comes to a lake of, like now, if it's a dry season and there's no water, who's responsible for going to fetch water? It's then usually the women that are. They have to travel longer distances. If their well is now dry, the one that's closer to their house, they have to travel a longer distance to go and fetch water. So what are the challenges that they're facing whilst going to fetch water? So there's the issues of gender-based violence come again. We've heard a lot of cases where women are reporting that they're being raped on the way to get water. And even in drought season, when now if there's aid that has come to help certain communities, what are the barriers that are there to getting the aid? Is there we've heard even in different nations where people that are giving aid, they asking for sexual favors from women for them to get aid. So although we're all being affected by climate change, but the effects are different between men and women. I also wrote something towards just the transport system in Zimbabwe, and how we now have these little private taxis that are faring women, but they're not registered, for example. So what are the dangers that are there with a girl that's coming from school using this public transport, and it being a man that is using the same public transport? There's vulnerabilities that are there for women that are not there for men, just by our biological setup. Like I said, we're different. So looking at it from a, like I was saying, using a gender lens allows you to then see how are we going to improve when it comes to even policy issues, for it to then accommodate both men and women without not, we can't fit under one blanket because we're two different species. When you look at some point there was an equity policy where with education, where young women were allowed to get into university with less points, say for law, than their male counterparts. This was not to say women were not good enough, but it was acknowledging the background that, like I was saying before, where young women have faced different issues in school that affect their education. So we're acknowledging that there's barriers to girls' education. So this might affect the number of points that they'll get at the A level. So to accommodate for that, we young girls were allowed to go into different programs with less points than men. But this is also given a time frame, because it's not only that function that's going on, but there's also methods that are there to then get away with the barriers that they're facing within education. And after that certain period of time, then everyone is we're now saying everyone has an equal playing field. So now you just need the same number of points. So addressing just what's coming in from behind, and then it, it's looking at it from just wanting to see what is the difference between the two, and how best can we then work out to make it conducive for both of them. But like I was saying, for me before, it's not a competition. It's not about who can do this better. We can't. We're trying to do away with men. We can. I know there's even a song that what a man can do, a woman can do. Yes, in that goes into even education. Yes, what a man can do, a woman can do. But looking at realistically, when you look even our physical makeup, there's things that men can do that women cannot do physically. But there's things that we can both also do, which women should be allowed to do, given the space.
This is very, very insightful. And of course, you are here on Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, the number one online radio when it comes to African and Caribbean music. And of course, we also have various programs, including this one. We also have mental health, we have religious music, religious talks. And we also have mental health, we have emotional wellness, all kinds of things. And so we're just so delighted that you have joined us today. And Mensa from Accra in Ghana says, our children must and should be protected. We cannot agree more. Thank you very much for saying that. And Motso, who is in Durban, South Africa, says, excellent presentation, enjoying the show. So thank you very much for your comments. Those of you who are listening in, we do enjoy your comments. And so please let us know where you're listening from, so that we can also let other people know. And there could be other people that you also need to spread this. I liked your reference to we're not in competition. You have said that a few times, and every time you said it, I'm going, yes, we are not in competition. This is not a competition. But it is important that we pay attention to the history that has led to some of this inequity in people. For example, I feel for a little girl, especially when they become teens, and I don't know what it is. Let me say this on global radio live. One of the things that really, really annoy me is when you see young girls who are beautiful, and I mean that, who are beautiful. I have two daughters, and they are beautiful. And you can tell this is a beautiful. I mean, not saying we go around and say, no, that one is ugly, that one is beautiful. No, I'm not saying that. And then you see them walking on the street, and you see men or boys like vultures throwing words or doing things that are disrespectful. Now, what really annoys me is oftentimes we don't have people stepping in to say, hey, wait a minute. That is not acceptable. You guys are not supposed to do that. People just walk by. You hear these things being thrown at women or young girls as if it's okay and nobody's saying anything. Those are the kinds of things that really tick me off. Now, I also come from the perspective of decoloniality. You know, when we talk about decolonization, there is what is called lateral violence, where people who have been colonized and have been brutalized, have been hurt and traumatized, they project their own hurt on other people. And I know that could very well be a reflection of their own things that they need to deal with. But we need to create a new culture that speaks up, that speaks out, and say to the boys or the men who might be picking on this little girl in this little private, emergency taxi, and actually say, guys, this is not appropriate. If this was your daughter or this is your little sister, would you say that? So we need people who call it what it is. Yeah. And then, of course, I know not everybody just lets it go. There are some people who stand up and they will speak up. For example, if that was to happen in my presence, I would definitely, do my best to mention that and bring an awareness to that. So you're absolutely right, because when I think of little girls waking up in the morning and doing all these chores before they go to school, and then when they come back from school, there are also these expectations to do certain things. And the boys, probably it's dark now because you're not the one cooking. You're not doing a whole lot of other things other than, do one or two things. The young ladies may end up not having enough time to study. So I'm really glad to hear that there was a time that, the Minister of Education would actually say, listen, it's okay to allow these girls to come in with these units simply because there are so many other factors that could be affecting them. So that is very, very encouraging. It's very, very encouraging to hear that.
Yeah, I was also going to speak on like how you were saying people just watch as people are being violated, and especially when it comes to women. Like I said before, I also appreciate men that are speaking up, even in public spaces, where if something wrong is done, then they'll speak up and say, no, this is not supposed to happen. We really need to hear more the voices of men speaking up against other men that are doing wrong. And even when it comes to women that are as perpetrators as well, because something that is often ignored is how women are also perpetrators of gender-based violence. So even when it comes to the hailing, if someone's dressed inappropriately for them because of sometimes it's cultural background where someone just feels entitled that a young woman is not supposed to be dressed that way on the streets in the city. And it's actually another woman that is saying this to another woman. So we still need people that will speak up, to speak up to whoever, regardless if it's a man that's saying it or if it's a woman that's saying it, but being able to speak out against it. Something else that we've had recently was we found that a lot of women are losing their wigs, as in their hair, in the city because these young boys on the street will just pull your wig off and run off with it. And your people, bystanders, would just look and no one's doing anything about it. In most cases, you hear people just say, oh, I was screaming, but no one actually ran after this guy, or they would need to run after him themselves. So it speaks again to that, just the violation of women in public spaces, and us as a community not doing anything about it, because we can't wait to say, oh, then you can go and report to the police. But what are we doing just as individuals to support each other and to support the community? Because it's also on us. We are the ones that are, well, our own support initially before we even go to the legal base.
I'm just listening to you and I'm saying to myself, it is really intriguing to have people like yourself who are practitioners, who are speaking not just from textbook answers, but you're speaking from what's happening on the streets. And of course, I mean, we have, three sons who are of age, and we should never stop helping our sons and other extended family members to actually learn to respect women and to respect their property. I mean, to think of young men or little boys, yanking, the wigs of women on the street and nobody saying anything. I mean, things like that happening in daylight. I mean,
Yeah.
it's important. It's important for us to help our young men to understand that is unacceptable. It should never be left to the police to deal with that. The public has a responsibility, and I really hope that our brothers and sisters are coming to that realization that it is our responsibility to make sure that everyone is safe and we're protecting each other. And this is really, really wonderful. And of course, those of you who have joined us or have been with us, we are here on today's Africa on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio with Miss Tinashe Madamombe, who is the founder of the Dorcas Project and is also the communications and gender specialist. She's a blogger, she's a speaker, and we've been talking about safe spaces for our children. Now, I know I'm looking at the time here and I'm realizing, oh my goodness, it's already that far into the program. Now, I am aware that you are working with various organizations to make sure that this creation of safety is a reality. Now, I know that it takes intentionality to be safe. You can create a space for people to talk, but they may never talk because still they don't feel safe. So we talked about safety as far as sex education is concerned, mental the space, economic space, because there are all these abuses that are happening.
Yep.
And it is very, very important for us to understand that we need to create a new culture where everybody feels safe. The young girls in particular and women feel safe. The men feel safe. And obviously, that's not the responsibility of the government. And this is why organizations like yourself, nonprofit organizations, the Dorcas Project, are such key collaborators in this, because the government doesn't have all it takes to be able to take care of these. Now, are there some things that you do with other people outside of Zimbabwe? What other things that you do outside of your own organization in collaboration with other similar or related projects?
At the moment, no, none that we're doing within organizations that are outside of Zimbabwe, but mainly just it's been the learning. So for me, I value just research in itself. So just researching on what are other organizations doing in different countries. Something that I've appreciated also by living abroad has been learning just the difference when it comes to the issues that are faced in a different country and ones that are faced here in Zimbabwe, and how they being dealt with, the systems that are there. So learning, it's more about learnings from other organizations, and because of how just the world has become global and you can easily find this information on the internet, it's taken a lot of learning even in terms of the support that's being given to young women in a different setting, and how can we then also learn from that and implement it in our local setting, but according to localize it, rather than, because we also just cannot take how things are being done in the West and then just come and then implement it here. The learnings may be just technical and structural, but there's a need to localize our own solutions here locally to make it work for us. Though last year I did get a small grant from the Zimbabwean German Society, and I was working with teen mothers in one of the areas, local communities here. And from my specialty, then I was using storytelling as both a way of mental and emotional support. And because the girls were creating garments that represented the challenges that they faced as teen mothers, because most of them had children before the age of 16. So they'll create garments that would speak to the challenges, and I would help them in shaping the stories that they had. And a few were positive stories, but most of them were negative stories. So taking them through that and just allowing them to have a space where they're speaking out of how they've really felt. But that then also goes into a healing journey for themselves in the challenges that they're facing in the community. But it just didn't end with just what they were facing, but also gave an opportunity to bring it out to communities, to tell them what the effects of what they would say or they would do when it comes to young girls and women. And I think in the long run, as the project then evolves, then that becomes also a space where communities are learning from the experiences of young women. Like say from communications, where what we're wanting to communicate is not only to the girls that are affected, but communities that are affecting them. Because I think something that's been very easy when it comes to issues of violence, gender-based violence, is we're always then teaching the victim how not to be violated. But in this instance, we also want to teach the perpetrator how not to be a perpetrator, as we were saying before. So some of the perpetration is because of ignorance. We don't know that the words that we're saying are harmful, or the actions that we're taking, although they're cultural, but they're also harmful to the young women. So that's been one of the main projects that I've had a collaboration with, but it was then using art and storytelling for the healing journey and telling the story of young women and girls.
Mm, mm. Wow, this has been insightful, very, very educational, and some of the things you have shared with us really give us food for thought. And realizing that we are not an island, we need to relate to other people, and when we see injustice, we need to correct it. We need to speak up, not in a rude way, not in an aggressive, uncooperative way, but to making sure that people do understand that we have values, and when those values are being undermined or attacked, we can actually stand up and make sure that we are doing the best we can to correct that. So this has been quite a dialogue, and so we are so delighted. And by the way, I have some other areas that I feel that we need to get into, but given our time, we have to bring you back. And this is not a threat, it's a promise. We will make sure that you will come back so that we can flesh out and develop some of the things that you mentioned to us. And now, as we come toward the end of our time together, I know you've talked about so many things, and I'm just wondering, what are some of the things you would like our listeners and viewers to remain with as we wind up, as we wind down?
Yes, and thank you for having me. It's been a great time. It's nice to have a space. Like I said at the beginning, for me, it's important to have and to hear women's voices, and it's something that I've been trying to do. Not even just my voice, but also to have a lot of different women's voices being brought out and speaking out. I like one of the comments that was given from Ghana that says our children must and should be protected, and I'll just bounce off that, expanding that our children and even our women as well should and must be protected. I think it's important to continue having these kind of dialogues where you are understanding from a different perspective, and also getting away from our biases that we have, whether it's from how we've been brought up or our backgrounds or just what we've heard, but coming to have different perspectives as well. So I love working with women, and like I said, my passion is also with orphan children. The support that we can give, not only from a financial perspective, but looking at holistically emotional support for women, and even just the mental support as well. So this has been a good platform. It's been nice to have the questions and for the conversation that we've had, and also just to
Listen,
hear. Yeah.
listen, the feeling is mutual. And one of the things that I am really delighted about when I think of Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, you know, the number one African Caribbean online radio, and the opportunities that they are creating for us to have these conversations on matters pertaining to Africa, is the fact that this becomes something of an archive, something that will be played in years to come. And we can also say, hey, here are some things that Miss Tinashe Madamombe is doing in Zimbabwe. Maybe some of our brothers and sisters, or some of our sisters in neighboring countries and across Africa, you know, in Lesotho, in Namibia, in Zambia, in Kenya, and Ghana, and Burkina Faso, they can actually say, oh, this is what's happening in Zimbabwe. What can we learn from that? And maybe, who knows, they might say, would you like to come and become our guest speaker? And I'm sure you'll be happy
Yes.
to
Definitely.
go and you know, and share your you know, intellectual wealth with them, because you are such a great resource. And would like to thank you for the work that you are doing, the work that you have done, and continue to do, and keep up the good work. And we're certainly looking forward to having you back. Now, I know I'd said in closing, is there one thing on your mind that you say, listen, before I go, Dr. FM, I'd like to say this?
I think the best for me is to say, as I close, is how we all, as individuals and as a collective, play a part in creating safe spaces for our children. So, don't look at the next person and think, what could they do to create a safe space for children and young women? But ask yourself, what can I do to make a difference? And just your contribution will really always make a difference in your community and in the large pool, even in the world. Yeah.
That is a very, very good note to end on. So again, to our viewers and our listeners, you've been listening to Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We go live every Saturday at 11 Eastern Standard Time, and we go live on YouTube, on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course StreamYard. And this has been your host, Dr. FM, and we're so delighted that you've been with us. And of course, we are broadcasting live in over 100 different countries around the world, and it is encouraging to hear from those of you who log in and let us know where you're listening from. We really appreciate that, and let's keep on keeping on doing that. Matters pertaining to Africa are things that affect all of us, and please continue to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, like, and share this channel with others as well. I just want to let you know that coming up on the hour at 1 o'clock here on Eastern Standard Time, we have the Caribbean Flavor with Mr. Marcus and Miss Gentle Blue. You don't want to miss that. So again, thank you for being with us today. We're looking forward to being with you again next week. And have a great day, and keep on keeping on doing the right things.